Hello, everybody, and welcome along. I've just realised that I've been speaking for about the last 45 seconds without audio, so I shall recap a little bit. It shows that any of us, as though we might think that we've mastered the art and learned beautifully how to use GoToWebinar, that occasionally we still do need to learn from our mistakes. So I've completely managed to unmute myself now, and I'll get things going. I want to welcome you all. It's really wonderful for me to look at the attendee list for today and see that we've got some newbies in the room, and we've got some people who haven't been along to our webinar series before, and it's great to have you here. We've also got more and more people who are registering for these webinars every single week, which is really cool. And so thank you so much to all of those people who've come along and gotten involved for the very first time. It's a quirky little topic, this one, this idea of unlearning. Most people talk to me about how we do learning better. And for me, I think this idea of unlearning has become an idea that I've sort of become a little bit so obsessed with that that I'm writing a book about it at the moment, this whole idea of what it is that first we need to get rid of out of our brains in order to be able to create a bit of room to, to clear the clutter a little bit, to do some truly effective learning. Most people do come to me to talk to me about learning, but not many come to me to talk about unlearning, but I'm looking to change that. I guess I'm also inspired a little by one of the, the planet's foremost educational thinkers in this regard, a man called Mr. Homer Simpson, who said that every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain. And I actually think Homer's got a point. I think we've kind of hit critical mass. I think we've kind of hit the limit of our ability to absorb content, and we know that new content, new information is being published into the world at exponentially increasing speed. And so our ability to absorb that is I think we've kind of reached the point where we sort of can't handle much more. And in fact, what we actually know from looking at some studies by groups like the Institute for the Future in University of Phoenix in the States is that their #1 critical work skill for 2020 and beyond is about the idea of, can we manage our cognitive load? Can we be able to handle the fact that when you search almost any Google term, you'll get millions and millions of responses. But what we need to be able to do is to be able to, if I may speak so frankly, to be able to look at those list of returns and search returns, and to be able to say, bullshit, 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 that's the one I want. So it's not a matter of just absorbing the content because it's there. It's our ability to actually discriminate in that content. And that discrimination is a higher order thinking skill. And that's, I guess, one of the things that I would really like you to take away from today, is that great learning is about higher order thinking. It ain't about just remembering. It ain't about just being able to regurgitate or even to perform on a test or to be able to, pass an interview. It's about something that changes people. It's about adding to our whole personal and professional capacity. And I guess that's where I'm going with the idea of unlearning. We need to unlearn the idea that learning is about trying to cram extra stuff into our head, because there just ain't the room. And as Homer reminds us, it just sort of leaks out our ears when we keep trying to add. So today, what we're trying to do first is to subtract. We're trying to take some stuff out of our heads about learning, whether you're a leader of learning, whether you're conducting workshops and running learning yourself, or whether you're just somebody who's looking to advance in either of those fields. Then there's certainly some stuff that are habits, that are anchors around our neck in terms of our history and the way that we learned to learn. There's a lot of the bad habits we have, we unfortunately started to make commitments to them when we were about 4 or 5. We first landed in a learning environment. We saw a teacher at the front of the room taking a powerful position, and we went, so this is what learning is. And it don't need to be. So what we need to do is to challenge a lot of those little myths, and we're going to challenge all of them together today. So I mentioned that quite explicitly too, that notion of learning together. That's something that also comes in incredibly highly in the study by the Institute for the Future, is that they said that what young people need to be employable throughout their careers, the young people who are moving into the emerging world economies at the moment, what they need is to be able to work collaboratively and to solve problems with others. They need an ability to understand the human element of solving problems together, and they need to know how icky and awkward that is, and they need to be able to navigate to better solutions and better outcomes through all of that humanness. So today what I want us to do is to really learn together as well. So a couple of ways you can do that. Number one is that you can use the question box. So in there you can say anything. So I say hello today to Jonathan, who's told me well done. I think that was in regards to unmuting myself at the start. So thanks, Jonathan. I got a wave from Mel as well. So I know that we've got people in there already who are contributing. There's two reasons you might use a question box. Number one is that it's about the content, what we're covering today, and you might have a question about how do I apply that given a certain situation. Use that, chuck it in there. Let's chew on it. Let's make today a really interactive and collaborative experience. And the second reason is that you might be having some sort of technical difficulty. So my wonderful, wonderful business manager, Chris, is online with us today. And if you tell her that you can't hear or you can't see or whatever it is that's going on there, she's got tips and tricks that I certainly have no idea about. And you're welcome to whack them in there, and she'll be paying attention to that question box as we go as well. You'll also notice that just like a traditional classroom, and I'm a little bit sad about it, but look, it's a cool little function, is that you've got that hand up feature there as well. Now, if you put your hand up, just like a regular classroom, I'm going to unmute you, and we're going to have a bit of a yarn. We're going to have a bit of a chat about what you're thinking and how you're thinking that some of this stuff can work for you. Or indeed, if the challenges are so much that we're actually going to try and do something that you're struggling to make sense of it. So look, I guess to get things going, what I'd like to do is to suggest to you that, first of all, this comes from a bit of a master model of mine that I look at our attendee list today and I see the wonderful Dr. Richard Hodges online with us today. And so Richard's incredibly familiar with this because we applied this across a large project with the Australian Navy. And what we said was that we wanted to, and I guess I gave this to this project, but something that I certainly got from the project was a wonderful expression that Richard and the people that work in defence used, which was to begin with the end in mind. And so what we're trying to do is to say, where are we trying to get through with this? Because far too much of what happens in education is that we are distracted by shiny objects. We think that if it's motivating, if it's interesting, if it's fascinating, if it's technological, then what we should do is take it and cram it into the existing model. And I would suggest that's the wrong thing to do. We need a filter that's better than just is it interesting or quirky before we decide to bring it in. So the filter I use is that, beginning with the end in mind. What's the end I'm looking for? I'm looking to provide education for everybody that covers the 3 A's, which means, first of all, that it's accessible. So what I'm trying to do is to make sure that anytime I build a learning experience, that it is something that people can get to and can use easily. Now, technology does a wonderful job of that, not because I've got wonderful PowerPoint slides and you are incredibly engaged by them. Look, I reckon my PowerPoint slides look good enough. I reckon they're reasonably pretty and a little bit funky and they've got some nice colours on them, but I don't think they're the reason you're going to pay attention today. I think that if I can provide different ways for you to be able to access knowledge and access expertise in a way that suits your own pace and path. I know that for me, I've developed a bit of a, because we all have habits about when we're at our best. I know that from my days as a school principal, my work habit was that I sort of ran like a maniac until about 4:30 in the afternoon, and then it tended to be that everyone would go home. And my period of productivity was at its highest from about 4:30 to 6:30 in the afternoon. So if I was going to watch a webinar like you are today, I certainly wouldn't be accessing it at, in the middle of the day or at 10 a.m. in the morning, because the interruptions and the flow of my work and my own even work body chemistry are going to work against me to engage very well, to access it. I'm not going to pay attention. So what I did learn is that if I was going to watch a webinar or listen to a podcast or watch an interesting TED Talk or whatever it is that I really wanted to access at that time, or read a book, that the best time for me to do it was to access it in some of that period between 4:30 and 6:30. Now, I spoke the other day to a learning and development manager who said that, she said that her best learning tends to happen on a Friday evening at about 8 o'clock. She's onto her second glass of wine. She's relaxed and she's feeling like, just sort of contemplative and pondering the world. And it's a great time for her to actually, if she's doing an online course or if she's got something important to read, it's a great time for her during that second wine to just, press play, to open the book and to access material when it works for her. Of course, you can't do that if all we do is run workshops and presentations at 10 o'clock in the morning when she's not particularly at her best. So what we need to do is to flip the content to make sure that we're allowing people to access it in a way that suits them. Of course, access isn't enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough, even, to be honest, to have you just watch this webinar today. Something has to happen out of it, and I have to be pretty confident that something does, which means it needs to be accessible, which means I need to know in some way what the impact has been upon you. So I like to ask questions, and I don't think we ask enough questions in our educative endeavours. I think that we do way too much telling. I want to explore that a little bit further today, and not enough asking. And as a result, people do lower order thinking. And I think what we need to do is to ask better questions about how you're going to apply this information, how you're going to design better ways of working as a result of this information. I want you to be able to get some really relevant feedback from someone as a result of this information, because I need to know. Otherwise, the only measure you've got is sort of kind of how interesting you find my voice, and that's probably going to wear thin after a while. And then the final thing is it needs to be actionable. So whatever it is that we learn, we have to feel very compelled that we're going to walk straight out into our work area and do something with it. The research says that if you don't do something with a new piece of learning within around 48 hours, then there's around a 90% chance that you'll do nothing with it. So what we need to do is to have people leave the learning environment with key decisions made, and the best way to make a decision turn into action is to declare it, is to get people actually declaring what are the actions, what are the behaviours that are going to change as a result of their either the investment of their resource, their time and their money in being in that learning environment. So what we want to know is, how are we going to get to a point where where people are most capable of being able to do something really concrete, not just think, not just feel, but where can they do something really concrete. So, Richard, I've got a question there from you, mate. I'm just going to defer to that for just a moment while I move on. What's the end in mind for unlearning learning? I see it as a way of increasing a person's capacity to manage variety and through that shape the future that they want. I actually agree with you, mate. I think I'm going to try, when I say that I'm going to try and make today actionable, the next part of what we're going to do today, Richard, is pretty straightforward, which is I'm going to give you 5 things that I want you to stop doing in education, in the way that we build educative experiences. And I'm going to give you 5 things that can replace them. So Homer Simpson theory, mate. I want to be able to, clear the decks. I want to be able to squeeze some things out of your head. And then I want you to be able to replace those things with something that's more productive. Rightio. Moving on. I guess one of the, while I jest a little about Homer's influence upon me, there's a fellow called Alvin Toffler, whose work I've read for a significant period of time, and one of his quotes, and I guess it's a quote that wasn't particularly well publicised while he was writing this, because Toffler actually wrote this way back in, and wrote many things like this back in the 80s, and he was talking about a future 30 years beyond where he was. And I really like to rate people who have made predictions about where the future is going to be, predicting being a much higher order thinking skill to do than just regurgitating. And what Toffler said back in the 80s was that the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write. It'll be those who can't learn, unlearn. So find a way to do something and then go, it's not serving me, I need to get rid of that, and then relearn again. So and I think what Toffler was telling us was don't focus too much on content, but focus on a repeatable process, a pattern, a habit around learning that we need to have that says, I'm going to be really pliable and agile in being able to absorb new ways of doing things, and I'm going to be just as pliable and agile in being able to unlearn them and get rid of them. And I guess this is where I first had my interest peaked in that term, unlearn. So I really like what Toffler's had to say there, and I guess that sits, very neatly, even Richard, behind my lesson plan today, which is that I guess what I would like you to do today is to make decisions about how it is that you're going to unlearn some of the things that have been habits as we move forward. So let's get into these 5. So 5 stops and 5 starts, just to make sure that you leave today with something very concrete. And I hope that out of the 10, you'll feel that there's something that's very actionable immediately for you. And the first imperative around education is stop delivering it. stop believing that education and somehow has been reduced to a commodity. In fact, to view it like something that I just need to drop off to somebody, you know, the way that a pizza delivery guy brings a stack of pizzas to your house is not only, I guess, insulting. It's insulting to your people, and they tell you that it's insulting because they disengage. So when you're purely in delivery mode and you just get up on a stage and you make a speech, or you stand in front of a training room and you make a speech, or you put on your PowerPoint slides and you begin to read them, no matter how good you are at it, it's quite insulting, and people will either actively or passively disengage. And what I mean by that is, you know, the most enjoyable ones to work with are certainly passively, and that's mainly because we don't know they've disengaged. You know, they look interested. They're continuing to rub their chins and to, you know, nod their heads occasionally and make the odd, yeah, and all that. But the truth is they're thinking about what they're going to cook for dinner that night. The actively disengaged will tell you up front, they disrupt. And I actually believe that any learning environment, if there's a trade-off in the learning environment between engagement and disruption. And there's a healthy kind of disruption, but this is the kind of disruption that actually stops people and stops the people around them from being able to do really fantastic things. So not only is it insulting, to that effect, it's dangerous in terms of your effectiveness. So it makes you really ineffective in being able to get that message across. The more that we think about it as we're just trying to drop that message on people. Now, the reason there are wide varieties in terms of how people, you know, how successful people are when they just view education as a content delivery thing, is that it relies heavily on the personality and the performance of the person at the front of the room. So it's very kind of rock star dependent. And I know that myself, I was approached, actually had a conversation on the phone today from an education conference who were, you know, inquiring about whether I would speak at the conference, and that was great. And, you know, it's always good to get in front of big conferences. And the conversation finished with something that kind of deflated me a bit. And it was that the conference organizer that I spoke to said, you know, so Adam, if you know anybody, you know, if you know any big international education stars who would kind of, you know, put 200 people, an extra 200 people into our conference, then, you know, could you just sort of point us towards them? You know, international ones are better. And I'm thinking, oh boy, you know, because this is about just putting someone on the stage to deliver something, just putting someone's name on a pamphlet. And it isn't about changing anything about the people in the audience. And it just disappointed me. One, they wouldn't look in the backyard here, because we do actually have some people who know a fair bit about learning and education in Australia that could make that change, you know, within an audience and with an audience. But they're just looking for someone who's going to land on a plane, deliver a keynote presentation, and then get back on the same plane and hopefully be home in a heartbeat. I don't think that's great education. I think that's basically just putting on a show. So we need to do better than that. And what I want you to do as a replacement to delivery is to start facilitating. And I often talk to, you know, I guess that whole idea of facilitating fantastic conversation begins pretty simply. I go back to my days as a principal, and I had the opportunity to open a new school, and I began it with a new way of saying hello. So instead of greeting each other with the boring, you know, good morning, Mr. Voigt, we did it a little more upbeat, and I used to say good morning, everyone, and then go clap, clap. And I thought that it was no big deal. And I thought that it was just one of those things that you did to try and get the attention of the hundreds of people who were at our very first assembly as we opened the school. But what I found was when I left the school, that's what people remembered. You know, nobody came and thanked me for the, you know, all the work that I did behind the scenes building a wonderful strategic plan, and no one thanked me for the incredible, the risky innovations that we brought into the learning environment. And we did. We brought some things in that were really different. But all I had was people sort of sneaking up behind me in the freezer section of the supermarket and saying, "Yeah, good morning, Mr. Voigt, clap, clap." And it emphasised to me that actually the scope we've got for being able to change the way that people engage in a learning environment is about changing the little things. So, for instance, if you look at this picture, this is a picture of Italian teachers. And what these Italian teachers are doing is collaborating around building a whole sort of semester of work for their students. It's not that they're teachers, it's not what they're covering, it's not the content of what they're talking about that fascinates me. But there's a handful of things that are present in this picture about the way that they're collaborating. None of them are big, all of them are little. that actually change the way that they're working. So first of all, the thing that I find interesting is that and they're probably little things that you notice as well. For instance, they're sitting in a circle. What does sitting in a circle do? How does actually gathering your people in a circle rather than putting them in a clump, rather than having a powerful person on a stage and people sitting in rows facing them, what does that do? Circles are wonderful shapes, and only for one reason. There's no powerful positions in a circle. So it's very difficult when you look at this picture to decide who the leader is, to determine who that person is. Some people, when I show them this picture, tend to say it's the fellow on the right with the glasses but then when we explore a little further, we tend to think, well, it's probably only some assumptions around that make him the leader. One is that he looks the oldest in the group, so that's an assumption that we shouldn't be making anymore. And two is that he's the person talking at the time that the photo was taken. But apart from that, it's very, very difficult to tell who it is that's in charge here, which means that the engagement of everybody, and this is what circles do, is that they position everybody to feel that they must contribute. And you get less of that, what I spoke to before about passive and also active disengagement from people. So that's one thing that's different, but that's not the only thing. The second thing that's different, I think, is that you'll notice that there's no table. So we haven't got people who are gathering in a meeting room here and sitting around the table, because what that sends a message to is that the product of the meeting is going to be on that table. It lets us know that what we're trying to do is to be productive, to produce something. We have to write something. So often we take minutes in meetings because we're sitting at the table and we kind of feel that we must. Not that it actually makes a difference in terms of what happens after the meeting, but we actually feel that because we've got a table, we've got to put something on it. And we've got to break that down as well. See, what the message that comes out of this picture when we say that there's no table is that the product, the actual aim, and Richard, the end in mind for this meeting, I think, is the dialogue. It's people actually working together and solving problems together, which is that 21st century skill that we know people are really going to need. And the third thing that I kind of find that's really interesting about this is, don't those chairs look comfy? You know, I just think it's such a little thing, but I think when we relax the parts of our brain that can distract the thinking part of our brain, we really want to access the neocortex, the immense thinking, you know, dirty big cauliflower looking part of our brain. We want to have that on when we're in a meeting like this, when we're solving problems, but we have other parts that get in the way. You know, our limbic system, our feelings center will get in the way, and also our cerebellum, which is kind of the computer that controls the machine, if you will. That'll get in the way too. And if people are uncomfortable and they're only concentrating on how numb their backside has become, or how awkward they're needing to sit, or whether they come to the meeting late and they're facing in the wrong direction, so they have to crane their neck to be able to see the PowerPoint presentation on the wall, then what happens is that people, they just don't use their neocortex effectively enough. So, dragging in some comfy chairs and allowing people to put themselves in an environment where they can create something fantastic is what great learning facilitation is all about. I think it's something we should keep in mind too from a relationship point of view. We all say that we want respectful, relational learning environments. Well, to get it, we have to create situations where the humans who are wishing to connect are comfortable. And when they are, we actually enhance those relationships that we can leverage further for better performance. Okay, so second thing that I want you to stop doing is to stop being authoritarian. I want you to let go of the power. Too many of our learning environments have been constructed such that the learning leader in the room must take an authoritarian or powerful position. I love that photo too. I just use that because I think it's pretty cool. There's two things that will kill engagement in any learning environment. Control, a person at the front of the room who is intent on controlling that learning environment through their power comes in at number two, actually. Number one is waiting. So, if you have to wait forever in a learning environment because the person who's controlling the learning environment talks and talks and talks and talks and doesn't want your contribution, then you can just about guarantee that some of that passive and active disengagement will start to happen. Being powerful, it seems, just isn't very engaging. And when I think about engagement, I'm actually talking about four things. I'm talking about whether the people that you're trying to reach in a learning environment, I'm talking about whether they're listening, speaking, thinking, or doing. And if they're not doing any of those things at any particular time because you're trying to control it or you're trying to deliver, then what happens is that people switch off. Two things also come out of the incredibly authoritarian leader. So if we can step away from a moment from actually running a learning experience and just think about our own leadership, when we take an authoritarian approach to our leadership, what happens is that we drive poor behaviour underground, which means we don't address it, we just make it more difficult to catch. So when we publicly humiliate others, if we use our power to insult, if we use our power to embarrass people, then what happens is that we actually send a lesson to them, not that they should reflect upon their behaviour. We send a lesson to them that they should get better and not get caught. So if you publicly castigate somebody because of through your power because they were late to work, what we can almost guarantee is that the next time they're late, they will try to sneak in the back door and not get caught. Their capacity or their interest or their engagement in being on time for work has not been improved at all. They just try not to get caught. Because what happens when we use authority or when we use authoritarian approaches, what happens is that we stigmatise, we reinforce labels. So even for the person that we castigate for being late, what happens is we've kind of reinforced an agreed label. You know, you're the late one is the label that I've agreed on because I said that in front of everybody. Once it's agreed upon by the person who we're trying to apply that label to, we kind of, you know, we all have little labels for ourselves, and once we've got them, we live up to them. The positive ones, the positive labels, I'm a good learner. You know, if you think you're good at learning, then you tend to be so. But when we tell ourselves, and I do this when I work with schools, when we tell ourselves that when we've got students who say, I suck at maths, the truth is they'll probably live up to that label. The late person, once they know that they're the late person, will probably live up to that label. The person who falls asleep in meetings will probably live up to that label if we continue to address it by means of being authoritarian. So keep that in mind for your leadership as well as just your conducting of learning experiences too. And I guess what I want you to replace that with, though, is being authoritative. And there's a very big difference between it. I guess I probably equally to the Kim Jong-un photo from the last picture. I really love this photo. It's from a couple of statues that are in New York. And I think that what I see here is not the removal of authority. So what you'll notice is that when I say don't be authoritarian, I'm not saying get rid of the authority. I'm saying have a high level of authority in the learning environment, but take it in an authoritative rather than an authoritarian kind of way. And I think that this little girl here certainly isn't able to control the bull through being more powerful, but what she's able to do is to do it through a strategy. And I think that's really important. That's strong relational practice. So what we need to do, I guess, sometimes, even if you think about 4 simple words about the way that you conduct yourself in the learning environment and through your own leadership, think about the words to, with, for, and not. And think about which one would best describe, of those words, to, with, for, and not, which one would best describe the work that you do with others. Do you tend to do things to people? Do you tend to sort of not do much at all and hide a little bit, meaning that your authority actually does reduce? Do you do things for people all the time? You know, there's a mantra of the over-supportive leader in any organisation, and it is if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. And I know that all of us have lapsed to that position before, but the really authoritative leader does things with people. And what that with work is about is having high levels of expectation, making it very clear where the boundaries, the limits, and what those clear expectations really are. And also marrying that with a high level of support, which means that there's a lot of, you know, frankly, praise, encouragement, nurturing, and support. And what happens there is you build these respectful environments when you get this right. Now, respect's an interesting word. We'll talk about respect, and while I'm working on cartoon characters today, I might as well mention Eric Cartman, who says you must respect my authority. And so what he's talking about, though, is just getting people to do what he wants them to do, and that's not respect. I actually, as much as I do a lot of work in the education world and in schools, and there's a lot of there's a lot that's done around respect, and a lot that's said around respect, and there's a lot of jargon that creeps into the education world as well. And so what I really like is, though, in that jargon is the use of the word respect, and they use it in terms of assessment tasks. Teachers now, they say you must deliver respectful assessment tasks. And at first I thought, well, what's that about? You know, it's about, you know, bowing as you present an assessment task to a student or something. I looked into it a little further, and I actually really like what I found, because what they were saying was that it is disrespectful to give a student a task to do that they had absolutely no chance of performing at all of doing well on, that you know that they will fail. It's equally disrespectful to put a task in front of somebody who you know will 100% get it right. There's no challenge in that. So what we need to do is to make sure that we're constantly providing environments where there's challenge, where there's clear roles for people, where people have to step up. And our job is to marry that expectation once we put it in place, like I said, is with support, encouragement, and nurturing. So really important, keep your authority level high, but know the difference between those two terms about being authoritative and being authoritarian. And Richard, you're breaking my heart now, mate, telling me that authoritarians have removed that statue. That's a wonderful romantic notion that I needed to preserve, mate, but I'll take that on notice. The next thing I want you to stop doing is stop obsessing over text. We have to really start to think about what people are after, what we're after. I guess with that, when you begin with the end in mind, when we produce a whole heap of text for people to get through and to absorb, what we're kind of telling them is that we're describing for them, we're priming them for the behaviours that they're going to need to demonstrate to show that the learning they did was worthwhile. And they tend to all be really lower level kind of learning things to do. Things like we're going to encourage them, if we provide a lot of text for people, what the message we're sending them is that you need to remember this. Now, remembering is a pretty lower order thing. We don't have to do anything particularly clever to remember something. And this is evident with the fact that sometimes when we do run these high text environments or events, what we do is we expect people to take notes. Now, our ability to write is very much, dependent on the skill of being able to summarise and take notes effectively. But I want you to think for just a moment about your own experience of being in a learning environment. I know myself, if I go to a seminar or a conference, one of the things that if you sit at the table, that usually the hotel or the conference centre that you're in will provide the 8-page notepad and a pen. And as an educator, I'm going to steal those because teaching's the only profession that you steal stationery from home to take to school. So I've got a very clear habit about that. But the problem is I get to the car, I don't know what to do with it, and because I've got everything else, I've got my laptop bag and I've got my sunnies and I've got my phone and I've got my wallet and I've got my keys. And so what I tended to do is to shove those notepads into the little pocket behind my driver's seat, and I don't look at them again. They're gone. And so the point of taking all those notes has been completely lost by the time I get home. We do it electronically as well now. So what we do is use apps like Evernote, which is wonderful for being able to record a very artful memory of what we've done in the learning environment. We can take photos, we can add links, we can make special notes and record voice in there as well, which is just fantastic. But then we tend to do the same thing in that we press save and then we don't go and look at those again. So we're priming people for what they want for what we want them to do when we provide too much text. In fact, the mantra, we mentioned before, the mantra of the overly supportive leader is if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. The mantra of the text-obsessed leader is to say, I really need to cover this. And what we've done is send two clear messages. One is that the presentation is all about them. I really need to cover this. I really couldn't care less whether my audience absorb any of it or not. I really need to cover this. And it primes our audience to be that we're going to step into tell mode. We're going to tell and show and deliver things to you. And I want you to think about some of the times perhaps you went to university where you had a really boring lecturer, a lecturer who liked to put up lots of PowerPoint slides and to read them to you and then to give you a handout to read and then to go back to the PowerPoint slides because the handout was really only to kill time while they changed PowerPoint presentations. And I want you to think about how horribly, utterly bored you were in that moment. The engagement drops away awfully because we're asking so little of people and we're asking them to do something that they know is pretty pointless anyway. So what we want to do instead of that is to get into this dialogue ignition mode. So what we want to do, I guess, is get out of that tell mode and into ask. So what happens when we ask a lot more is that we get people who are, whose behaviour post the learning experience, and that's what we should be looking to impact. I was working in a school the other day, and I was working with the VCAL students, so the year 11 and 12 kids who kind of have an alternate pathway because the traditional way of learning hasn't worked very well for them. And I was jumping in with another teacher doing a few different things, and I asked the kids to kind of stretch their thinking. They were kind of using a website to try and have a look at certain jobs that they wanted to do, and trying to work out what the hourly rate of pay was for that job, so they could, then work out how they were going to budget for moving out of home, and how many people they'd need to move out with, and all of those kinds of really practical life skills. And I just threw in a couple of questions for them. I just stopped them periodically and threw in questions. Also, can I ask you though, could you make that job better? So before you just put in there, plumbing, is there a way that we could use a plumbing skill or work similarly to a plumber that would allow you to potentially earn more money? Or, I don't know. And I just planted the question, and the kids sort of looked at me like I was an idiot. What are you talking about? What are you asking us stuff like that? And one of the boys, who apparently is usually one of the more disruptive lads in the class, he grabbed his computer and he just sort of looked at me strangely. And then I saw him type and everyone like that, and he came back, he goes, have a look at this. And he showed me that the hourly rate for an apprentice plumber is apparently significantly lower than the hourly rate for an apprentice irrigation fitter. So somebody who installs fire systems in buildings and things like that. So he said, I just like working with water. He said, that'll do me. I'll do irrigation and sprinklers. And so he's found a whole new little pathway there. And it was just because we inspired the dialogue. And what we watched was that even in the moment of delivery, the kids were sort of, furrowing brows at me, like, what are you talking about? And all that. But the teachers who were observing that lesson said the next 10 minutes were the most engaged those kids had ever been. So we've got to start thinking about not just what the experience is in the moment, but what do people do? How do people behave when they leave? And when we actually get people into really high-level dialogue, they continue to chew on concepts. They continue to work out how they're going to apply things. They work out how to contextualise key points. They actually start solving problems even while they're sort of walking back up the corridor to their offices afterwards, which is really exciting because the verbs that they tend to be using in their conversations tend to be higher-level verbs rather than lower-level verbs. When we obsess about content and delivery, and when we obsess about text, what we do is we have people, the things that people do, the verbs we would use is that they list things, they label things, they duplicate, they observe. We might even be asking them to memorize things. When we get into ask mode, when we really initiate some cool and interesting and deep dialogue, they tend to do things like they compose new things, they create new things, they hypothesize, so they actually start to evaluate different ways of doing things, they anticipate and they adapt. And I don't know about you, but if I was running a business with a large staff, I would rather have that staff doing the second set of verbs than the first. So hugely important to actually say, okay, what do I want people to do after the learning experience, and how do I want them to do it after the learning experience? It's not just about the moment. Which gets into, I guess, the next thing that I want you to stop doing is to stop relying on special events. Stop relying on putting on a wonderful show for people every now and then. Stop relying on running a conference as though it really changes anything. Most people's feedback from a conference gears around two things. It's the food and the temperature. So they'll make comment, and not only will the food and the temperature be the thing that they are most quick to comment on, the quality of the food and the temperature will directly impact the quality of the feedback they give in other areas too. So if they give you a stinker for food, you're likely to get a stinker for the quality of the presenters as well. And this is why feedback on special events is just ridiculous. It's not serving us at all. In fact, a wonderful professor who I've spoken to called Donna Cross, and I really rate Donna's work in terms of building great learning and strong well-being in organisations through learning, says that in any 90-minute presentation, which you tend to get presentations at your special events, in any 90-minute presentation, we'll commit about 7 seconds to long-term memory. So it doesn't give you a great deal to work with. And what that's about is that affect comes over impact every single time. So, and the target around this as well is something that we need to keep in mind. Whenever we run a special event, the target tends to be to keep the PCO, the professional conference organiser, or the CEO happy, which is great if you can hit that target. Will it change the behaviour, the thinking, the capacity, you know, the idea generation potential of the people in the audience? Probably not. But as long as we hit the target of keeping the PCO or the CEO happy, then that was good enough. And I don't think that actually is good enough. I want you to think, if you can, for a moment. Let me run this experiment with you. Can you tell me what was the 5th most impactful learning experience that you've been to? And for most people, there is no way known that they can do that. You're lucky if you can remember 1 or 2 really powerful and impactful learning experiences that you've been to. And it's not because they were bad experiences, it's because they were events. And we need to get away from this one to many and this one size fits all idea that we can stand in front of people and tell them things, because again, that's about us. It's, you know, it's about putting us as the most important people in a learning environment. Get away from that, show some empathy, and start to think about what it's like for the people in your audience. And think about how you can actually change the people who are there, rather than just get good feedback from them. So what do you do? What do you do instead of running special events when it comes to learning? Well, I want you to flip the learning experience. I want you to turn it absolutely on its head, and we have some incredible technological tools that allow us to do that now. And I say awesome technological tools, and people say, oh, rightio, that means we've got to go online learning. Online learning is the way to go. And to a point, yes. So it's yes with an asterisk under it. We've got to be a little bit careful that we don't swing too far and lose the elements of great personalised learning, of doing the learning with others, that some online learning courses are starting to have. In fact, that asterisk is a real beware for me, because there have been what we call MOOCs, massive open online courses, developed all around the world. With wonderful capacity for people to be able to learn from, say, from Stanford University in the United States, when they live in places other than the United States. They don't have to attend personally, they can just attend online. What we're finding is the dropout rates of MOOCs have now become worse than the dropout rates of face-to-face university courses. And universities are frantically scrambling now to try and work out what that's about. And what it's about is the absence of the human element. So it's quite like, you know, obviously this is one of those sort of slightly corny Shutterstock sort of pictures. But one of the things, the reasons I chose it, is because they're using tech to access it in their own, using their own pace and path. They're using it while they're having a cuppa. It looks like it's a morning tea or a lunch break, but let's have a look at this, hey, and see if we can make sense of it. And they're doing it together. There's a human interaction there that's enhancing that flipping of the learning. So probably the most famous flipped learning approach is probably the Khan Academy that Salman Khan originated. And what he did was he just started to produce YouTube clips that helped his nieces and nephews with some mathematical stuff they were studying at high school. And the advantage that Khan gave the people that watched his videos was that they could replay it and they could rewind it. And this is why flipping the learning beats having an event-based approach to learning, is it allows people to watch it over and over and again to be able to really understand it. You know, when you watch a movie, sometimes there are certain things that you catch after the 4th watch of the movie that you'd never seen before, and the whole thing really starts to make sense. So if you're a little like me, sometimes I think more than half of the movies I watch, I kind of don't get the plot completely the first time round. I need to watch it a couple of times. So that's why he did that. And that's exactly the same way with learning. So when we can take content and chunk it into something that's accessible for people, what we tend to find is that they can, if we present it to them in a way that they can watch it multiple times or pause and rewind or go back again, and particularly then also if we start to combine that with asking good questions. So if we can make part of our online learning approach about asking people questions about what they know, what they apply, and how they might actually use that in a variety of different scenarios, how they would design better solutions as a result of their learning, then those answers, when we ask them to provide those online, they can drop through to a line manager, they can drop through to a mentor, who then has some fantastic content for what they're going to actually speak to that person about. So this actually, our concept of flipping learning not only improves capacity of people, but it improves your ability to assure that learning is actually happening and that it's changing behaviour in your organisation. So there's incredible potential there. So I say to you that flip the way that we present content to people, absolutely. Just don't lose the human element as you do it. I think the last thing that I want you to do, as excited, as fabulous as these people look in this little picture here, I want you to stop measuring enjoyment. I want you to stop thinking that because an event was run where people clapped at the end of it, or that a certain percentage of people came up and shook hands with you afterwards, or because you had to spend half an hour there, you know, discussing how wonderful your presentation was with people who wanted to smother you with compliments. I want you to stop measuring the effectiveness of your work by how many people really connected with a story that you told about your childhood. And I want you to stop, obviously, as I mentioned before, I want you to stop measuring your effectiveness by, you know, feedback forms as well, because of how easily corrupted they are. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. And mainly there's some, you know, this isn't paying any respect or attention to how people actually behave or change after the learning experience. It's just about whether they had fun at the time. Now, I talk a lot, even in my presentations, about and my workshops and my professional learning days that I run. I talk a lot about wanting to produce positive affect because it helps people to learn. You know, I talk about wanting to inspire people, you know, challenge people, provoke people, strengthen people, and connect people. They're my 5 non-content-based learning intentions. But people experience it in different ways while they're in the learning environment. I presented to an American audience once, and I told them I wanted to inspire them, and I asked who likes to be inspired, and all these hands went up in the air. It actually looked like this picture, and I went, yes, and you know, which is great, you know, and it made me feel good for a moment. And I asked Australian audiences who likes to be inspired, and they kind of go, yeah, me, I suppose. And so we're less enthusiastic about it, but it doesn't mean that things aren't different after the learning environment. So we want to really provide positive affect without relying on it as our measure of success. So what are we going to measure? We're going to measure impact. We're actually going to say what changes. How can we be really clear about what changes after the learning after the learning experience? And for me, I reckon the best way to do that is to have people make very clear decisions. I love the thinking frame when I'm working with others of KTFD. Of you know, there should be something that people know, you know, that's the K. There should be something that people think. I should have something that they're walking away going, yeah, that makes sense, but I haven't quite worked it out yet. There should be something that people feel, and I've already declared my 5 non-content based learning intentions that I want people to feel while they're there. But the last one's the D, and I know that a mentor of mine in Matt Church talks about the D in KTFD as being, you know, when you decide, you know, that's what the D is for. The side is the same as the etymology behind the word decide is the same as horrible words like homicide and genocide and regicide. The side means to kill off, which means that you kill off choice. Now, the best decisions where you genuinely kill off choice, where you genuinely cross a line in the sand, are those that you make publicly. You know, I certainly have, you know, very regularly made a private declaration that I shall lose 15 kilo. It's the public ones that tend to have a high level of accountability wrapped around them. So we're looking to bring accountability to our learning environments. The way we do that is we ask reflective questions. I'm, again, Richard, really pleased to hear about that feedback that you're getting about what we did with the Navy. And I think that, I hope that one of the most powerful parts of it was that that reflective question commitment we made, that we're going to ask people what they know, we're going to ask people how they're going to apply it, and we're going to ask people how they would design certain situations with this in mind, given a certain scenario. We ask them, you know, we get that base right, but then we want them to do something really interesting with it. And also getting people to self-assess. You know, get them to actually fill out those, you know, wonderful rubrics, you know, those little tables to let us know where their gaps are, not just what the parts of the learning are that they enjoyed. So I want you to get away from measuring enjoyment in learning environment. You know, I hope it's fun. I really do, you know, that, but it's actually not the most important thing. I want you to actually get towards a stage in your learning work where you're measuring impact far more regularly. So look, there they are. Them are 10. Number 10, 5 things that I want you to unlearn, 5 things that I want you to just stop doing, just cut it out, you don't need them. And 5 things that I want you to replace that with. So it's not about adding to your workload here, it's about clearing the decks, making some room for you to be able to do some awesome stuff with it. Now, what I want you to do after today, this is something that thought leaders and people in consultative work are told regularly not to do, but I'm going to do it anyway because I really want you to have this and start doing something with it. I want you to download the slide deck from today. So if you look at the handout section in the control panel, While you're doing that little download, you might like to be thinking a little about any questions that you might have. So remember that even as we're closing off the webinar here, we do have a little time. So you're welcome to put a hand up. You're welcome to pop a question in there if you'd like to get an answer on that while we've got this time available to us. But yeah, I really want you to have the deck from today and put that in your hot little hands and to do something with it. It excites me. I guess the only thing I ask in return is that if you take the slide deck from today and you do go out there and do some fantastic things with it, I really want you to let me know. I want you to let me know what you did with it as you move forward. And I want you to know that we can bring this work to your organisation too. Like I mentioned, I'm speaking to the Vocational Educational and Training the Development Centre conference in Torquay in a few weeks' time, and I'm really excited to be bringing that methodology to a group of people, to several hundred people who are running training for people all the time. And so we're going to deliver that keynote and a couple of workshops and some facilitation as well while we're doing that work, and we can coach and train you to get that work done and have that happening for you as well. And then as Richard bobbed up with some information about today, we've been we work in big partnerships as well with people to make sure that whatever it is that you're trying to get done in your organisation, that it happens effectively. So I'll just finish up there. Just Binder, you've put a question in there. Thank you for your compliment on it being a great presentation. Any ideas, any tips on how to pitch your discussion facilitation at the right level for the group of people? Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess just Binder, what I always like to do is I hark back to my teaching days. And one of the things that really effective teachers do is that they differentiate, which means that they find out very quickly what the gaps, what the capabilities, and what the skills are of the people in the room. They also like to try and find out what the needs and interests are of them as well. So I'll often, instead of beginning a presentation with a really interesting slide or a fantastic joke and all that, I'll often pose a big question. So I'll often ask people, for instance, if you were going to be the CEO for the day and all that, what are the 3 key strategic things that you would like to change in that organisation by 5 p.m. that evening? Stand up in a group. I want you to get rid of the table for a moment. I want you to find 4 other people, 4 being the optimum number to work collaboratively. So I'll get 4 people, walk away from the tables, get in a group of 4. I want you to discuss that, and then we'll get back together. I want you to tell me if you had one absolute light bulb moment that comes out. Now, I'm going to be really sneaky about this, Jaspinder. I don't really care if there's awesome light bulb moments come out of it, because what I do in that moment is walk around the room and listen to what those gaps are. So I think that that's really important. So, a group of people that are in front of you or a part of your team, Jaspinder, same applies. Ask an interesting question, and through their answers start to differentiate what it is that they really need or what they really want to be working on. So I hope that's a useful step for you. All right, we'll finish up there, guys. Thank you so much for today. I've really enjoyed doing this topic. I think for myself even, it's exciting to be able to take some of that work that I mentioned earlier that I'm bringing into that book around Unlearn, and to package it in such a way that I hope for you that it has been a very accessible way of understanding how we need to unlearn certain things in the way we work. Hope it's been accessible. I hope you're able to actually, rate for yourself your level of what you do. You know something new? Are you able to apply it? Could you use it to design something fantastic? And I hope it's actionable. So I hope that there's something small that comes out of today that you're able to do and to change, and you never know, to be able to transform in your organisations as well. So let me know if I can help. There's the contact details. Stay in touch. Have an awesome end to August. See you all in September. Okay, bye for now.